My first
adaptation
turned into...
a pile of crap.
That's rough, buddy.
If you've been alive for any amount of time, then you know M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender is one of the worst movies ever made. And if you've been on the internet for any amount of time, then you know people love crapping on this movie. Most people who do so fall into two camps. The first is fans of the original Nickelodeon animated show who hate how badly this film massacred the show, and the second is film students who see this movie as low-hanging fruit with which to display their prowess. Or you could be both. I sort of fall into both camps. I am a relatively new but huge fan of the show, and though I'm not a film student and unfortunately probably will never be one, being a film major is my emotional support fantasy, so it's about time I made this video. While watching this movie, I was constantly pointing out things they changed from the show that I thought made a negative impact on the movie. It's objectively a bad adaptation, and that's what a lot of people focus on when talking about it. However, it came to me that an adaptation should be able to stand on its own, separate from its source. And I asked myself, if the original Nickelodeon show didn't exist, if this movie was an original idea, would it still be bad? Yes. Even if this movie was not based on anything, if it was its own fully formed creation, born from Shyamalan's mind, it would still be utter crap, and in this video I'll break down why. I'm gonna try to treat this as if it was an original idea, so I won't be making reference to the original show. However, I will reference the show 5 times at specific moments during this video because I want to further enhance my point and portray how whatever failure on the movie's part I'm talking about could have been avoided and was avoided in the show. So basically I'm not going to be talking about the original show at all, but I'm also going to be talking about the original show. Are you confused yet? Me too. Cool.
Secret talk, secret talk.
This movie has no characters. Instead, it has sad, empty shells of nothing taking the form of humans. I cannot tell you a single thing about any of these characters. I mean, he's bald, and she has hair, and he has a ponytail, and he's Indian for some reason. Like, they aren't people. I don't know who has the best ideas, who's the funny one, who takes things seriously, who's active, who's the problem solver. I don't know any of that, and I don't think Shyamalan knows either. It's like when Shyamalan was outlining this screenplay, he just made a list of the main characters and said, I'll come back to flesh them out later, and then he just never did. If that's actually what happened, I wouldn't be surprised, because it feels like we're watching the outlines of them, the initial ideas for these characters, which happen to be only their names and a general look. This is the first and possibly the biggest problem with this movie. Characters are how we interact with this story. Characters are our introduction to this world. They are how we connect with what we're watching. If there's nothing to them, then we have nothing to connect to. I don't care about this 100-Year War because I don't know if Aang is broken up about it. I don't know what that means to him as a kid or as the Avatar. I don't care about his destiny or whatever because I don't know how he feels about that. I mean, yeah, sure, he ran away, but I don't know why he's back now or how he decided he wanted to help. I don't care about the Fire Nation and all the terrible things they've been doing because that's such a big idea. The Fire Nation being evil is such a huge, vague concept that it's hard to visualize and care about. The way you make your audience care is to take that big idea and make it smaller, personalize it. Katara and Sokka's mom being killed in a Fire Nation raid and their father leaving them to fight in the war does that. That would give us our connection. That would make us care. Except Shyamalan doesn't treat that as a personal thing. He doesn't use it to characterize them, especially Katara. Instead, he throws it out there and moves on, rarely coming back to it. He mentions the death of their parents and the absence of their father like someone commenting on the weather, and I don't care. The lack of their parents and the trauma that comes from them doesn't inform how they live their lives or give them any specific personality traits. I don't care about Zuko and his non-scar because I don't know how that's changed him or if it's even changed him at all. I don't know what he values other than honor. I don't know who he cares about. I don't know what his relationship with Iroh or the men on his ship is like. I don't know why he lives the way he does because Shyamalan doesn't give that information to me. These characters suck because they don't have anything to them, and even when we get information that should characterize them and inform their personality, it doesn't. The primary way to connect with this story is not doing its job. We cannot connect to lifeless sacks of meat no matter how hard we try, and even if we could, believe me, you would not want to connect to this. This is the first thing we're introduced to in this world, and it's already off to a terrible start. And it's only gonna get worse.
Secret talk, secret talk.
Acting bad. Noah Ringer has like one expression, which is straight face. Oh, but he also has concerned face, so Yay! He delivers all his lines like he's just reading them off his script, and to be honest, most of the actors sound like that. He brings absolutely no personality to this performance, which may also go back to the character having no personality. He just doesn't act like a kid, you know? He seems like a boring 35-year-old checking out his groceries and being mildly annoyed that it's 10 cents per plastic bag. Nicola Peltz is uninteresting and uninspired. She seems the most amateur out of the entire cast. Well, actually, Jackson Rathbone is the worst, but don't worry, we will get to him. And I'm just like, didn't this girl get any practice? Training? No? You just tossed her into this movie for the heck of it? She's so plain, and not for any other reason either. It's not like Katara is a plain character. Well, actually, she is in this movie, so I guess Nicola Peltz played her perfectly. She's bad, is what I'm saying. Dev Patel was bad too. I don't want to rag on Dev Patel too much because he is genuinely a good actor. I mean, Lion is one of my favorite movies ever. If you haven't seen it, please do. But this just goes to show that even the best actors cannot make gold out of crap, and crap is exactly what he was given. He plays Zuko too dramatically, until it crosses into melodrama, which does not work. When you have a character like this, there's a very fine line that you need to walk, and with the combination of the underdevelopment of the character and the terrible writing, Patel unfortunately tips into melodrama far too often that it's just funny, and you never want your villain to be unintentionally funny. Jackson Rathbone was by far the worst actor in this movie. Whereas Noah Ringer has straight face and concerned face, Rathbone really just has straight face. I'm serious, his face does not move, and it's unnerving. It doesn't seem possible to be that emotionless, and yet he manages it somehow. So not only can he not act with his face, but his words aren't anything special either. I have never seen such a dry delivery of lines. I mean, I've made speeches at school trying to get my new students to join whatever councils and clubs I'm a part of that are more emotional and compelling than every word that comes out of Rathbone's mouth. After all, I did get those students to believe in what I was saying enough to join. I compelled them. I made them believe that joining the Community Involvement Council would be the best decision they made in their entire high school careers. I sold the idea of extracurriculars to them, an idea that already isn't the easiest to make people care about. Jackson Rathbone couldn't even sell me the idea that he and Katara are siblings. He couldn't sell me the idea that he was irrevocably in love with Yue. He couldn't sell me the idea that he would follow Aang to the ends of the world. And all of those things are 100 times stronger than believing in Community Involvement Council. And yet, I'm the president of that council, and Rathbone has multiple Razzies to his name. TLDR, I could have played Sokka leagues better than him. Which brings me to the next section, which combines both characters and acting to create a perfect storm of suckery.
Secret tunnel, secret tunnel.
Sokka was so atrocious in this movie that I felt he warranted an entire section just to himself. Folks, for those of you who have had the misfortune of watching this movie, can you tell me one thing Sokka does in it? I'll wait. Yeah, I didn't think so. Sokka is utterly useless throughout this entire movie. He is just there to fill space and do absolutely nothing else, and you're all intelligent people, so you know that's not good. Shyamalan didn't, apparently. If you took Sokka out of this movie completely, virtually nothing would change, and that is a problem. If your character has no impact on the story, they shouldn't be in it. Either give him something substantial to do, or find everywhere he's mentioned in the screenplay and hit backspace. Either justify your $150 million budget, holy crap, by paying this guy for playing an actual human, or cut him out and save some cash. This genuinely makes me angry, and here's why. Enter show reference number 1. Sokka is already at a bit of a disadvantage to every other character because, unlike them, he is a non-bender. This means he can't directly contribute to fight sequences and practice sessions as well as Aang, Katara, Toph, who was thankfully spared the dishonor of being in this movie, and Zuko do later on. Not only does this lead to insecurity, which is a big part of his character, especially in Book 3, but it also makes it extremely easy for him to be useless. I mean, in a show that's largely based on bending, being a non-bender immediately sets Sokka apart and makes him seem like both less of a threat and less integral to the story as a whole. The showrunners clearly knew this, so they worked really hard to make sure Sokka was just as important to Team Avatar as Aang, Katara, Toph, and later Zuko and Suki. Sokka is highly rational. He isn't one to jump to conclusions and doesn't really believe in things he can't see with his own eyes. In fact, he actually resists all things to do with the Avatar and the spirit world in the beginning of the show. He's the thinker. He thinks things through to a T. And also, he's the funny guy. He's the heart of Team Avatar and frankly what keeps them from falling apart. On top of that, he's insanely intelligent. He's the inventor, the idea guy. He comes up with great plans that may not always work, but that lead them towards a bigger goal. And on top of that, he's a warrior, very skilled with his machete and boomerang. He practices with the Kyoshi warriors, and later he becomes a master swordsman. So yeah, he's not a bender, but there's so much to him that makes him an integral member of Team Avatar. Sure, Aang couldn't have learned waterbending, earthbending, and firebending and faced Ozai without Katara, Toph, and Zuko, but none of them would have lived that long or gotten where they needed to be without Sokka's war balloon invention, his idea to spend his vacation at the Great Library, his revelation that Jet had been brainwashed, his escape from the Ba Sing Se Palace with Toph, his plan to bust his father out of prison, or his leadership of the sabotage of the airships. In the show, he is a beautiful, three-dimensional character that has just as much to contribute to ending the 100-Year War as everyone else. The movie takes that all away from him. He's not highly intelligent, he's not really a skilled warrior, he's not funny, he's not super rational, he's not an inventor, he's nothing. He is a waste of space. There is no reason at all for him to be in this story, and that is tragic. If your character has no bearing on the story as a whole, then they are not a character, they are a prop. Once more for the people in the back, if your character has no bearing on the story as a whole, then they are not a character, they are a prop. Control F, character name, backspace, backspace, backspace.
Secret tunnel, secret tunnel.
From almost every story, you can expect some level of exposition, but there will typically be a lot of it in fantasy, sci-fi, and dystopian worlds, seeing as there's going to be a lot of new things the audience has never seen but needs to learn. Most writers try to sprinkle their exposition into the story sporadically, as organically as possible, avoiding the dreaded info dump, which is amateur, can break the flow of the story, and just be plain boring to audiences. The Last Airbender has a lot of exposition, which, okay, fine, it's to be expected from a whole new fantasy world. However, it's less weaved expertly into the story, and is more just crammed in there, all at once, with no thought whatsoever. Whereas most stories try their best to avoid info dumping, The Last Airbender embraces it, by which I mean that almost every single piece of exposition we get is part of an info dump. And this is terrible for those aforementioned reasons. It's amateur, which makes you believe whoever wrote this has had little to no experience writing before. It breaks the flow of the story, which is doubly horrific with this movie, seeing as exciting moments are few and far between. So when it seems like we might finally be getting to one, we get a big exposition dump first, and suddenly I'm not hyped anymore. And of course, it's just plain boring. Watching people stand around and talk is not exciting. If I wanted to do that, I would just go to a party where my crippling social anxiety would make it impossible for me to interact with others, so I just have to listen to everyone else talk while constantly wallowing in my own awkwardness. And I don't want to do that. I'm at the movies. I want to sit in silence in a room full of other people where I can watch something fun instead of talking to the person beside me. I mean, if you have no other option but to info dump, and I guarantee you there is almost always another option, at least make it fun to watch. I think Marvel movies can be really great at this. Specifically, I'm thinking about two instances in Far From Home. The scene where Fury and Mysterio are explaining to Peter the big bad threat, and the scene where Mysterio reveals he's actually a bad guy. These scenes technically are just people standing around and talking, but it's so much more engaging to watch. In the first scene, we've got this floaty visual effects thing that drawing in our attention. The people are moving around. They're constantly changing the composition of the scene, so it keeps feeling fresh and new. For the reveal of Mysterio, we get fun editing and cutaways, which keeps our attention, and the atmosphere of the scene is restless and neurotic, so it jumps out at us. It also doesn't hurt that Jake Gyllenhaal is fantastic in this scene. Seriously, he's an absolute treat to watch. And I'm not saying these two scenes are perfect, because they're not. Info dumps will never be perfect. But they can work when you surround them in bells and whistles. The Last Airbender has neither bells nor whistles. Every info dump is the most blandly acted, shot, and edited scene, and they're a chore to get through. Take this scene, for example. Before Katara and Sokka leave to help Aang, Gran takes them aside and tells them about the Avatar's purpose and, the Avatar cycle and, the spirit world, and okay, to be honest, I don't entirely remember what she was talking about here, which again goes to show how bad this is. Side note, I watched Far From Home once, over a year ago, and I still remember those two exposition scenes. I watched The Last Airbender twice about 2 weeks ago, and I remember nothing. Make of that what you will. Anyway, this scene is comprised of Gran sitting on one side and Katara and Sokka sitting on the other. No one's moving around, the composition isn't changing, we get the exact same shot, reverse shot, reverse shot, over and over for like 2 minutes. There's nothing drawing in or keeping our attention. They do have a visual aid, which is the map, but it's still not great. In the first exposition scene in Far From Home, the visual aid is holographic, moving, floating in midair between the characters, and changing in interesting ways. The map is a map, and that's it. I've seen maps before, I've even seen fantasy maps before, and they're not super interesting to look at for long periods of time, especially if you can't even see the details. So not only is exposition uninteresting and handled amateurly, but the movie is also overzealous with it. What I mean by this is that we learn things that we don't need to know at that moment in time. In this scene, Gran starts explaining the rules of the spirit world and how the Avatar is the bridge between our world and the spirit world, but my question is, why? Why are you telling me this? This is completely irrelevant to the situation at hand. We do not need to know this information right now. It's doing nothing for us. That would be like if, in Far From Home's first exposition scene, Mysterio suddenly starts talking about how his Earth had purple trees and flying rhinoceros. Like, that's not relevant. It could be relevant later on, like if Peter and Mysterio learned that purple trees and flying rhinoceros are actually super important to saving the world. But right now, in this scene, there is no need for purple trees and flying rhinoceros. Give us that information when it's relevant, aka when it can be organically worked into the story. Similarly, we don't need to learn about the spirit world right now. It won't come up for like another half hour, so we don't need to know about it. What we do need right now is to get Katara and Sokka to Aang, and fattening up this exposition with information that doesn't matter at the moment is useless. Finally, the last Airbender commits one of the worst writing sins ever when it comes to delivering exposition. In this scene, Commander Zhao is telling his crew Zuko's backstory, how he spoke out at a war meeting, was burned by his father, and banished from the Fire Nation, condemned to spending his life searching for the Avatar, for capturing him is the only way to regain his honor and return home. This is yet another info dump, which is an issue, but the bigger problem is how the scene starts.
As you know.
Stop right there, because I can guarantee you that whatever you're about to say is going to be terrible. This is what is referred to in the writing realm as you know, exposition, and it's when one character delivers exposition to another character starting with the phrase, as you know. This is so egregious, because by starting with the phrase, as you know, you're implying that that person already knows what you're about to tell them, which then begs us to ask the question, if they already know, then why are you saying it? You see, as you know exposition is not for the character speaking. It's not for the character being spoken at, or any other character in the scene. It is strictly for the audience, and in my opinion, this is the laziest and stupidest way to deliver exposition. I mean, sure, you could make the argument that the purpose of Zhao saying this here and now and in this fashion is that he's trying to antagonize Zuko, but if that's what Shyamalan wanted, there were other ways to do that. This scene is just pure, dumb exposition for the audience, and it makes me so mad. I mean, the equivalent of Zhao telling everybody Zuko's backstory here would be like if I were to go up to somebody on the streets of Toronto and say, Canada is a country. We are currently in Canada. More specifically, we're in Toronto, which is a city in Canada. That's how dumb it would sound. Someone walking down the streets of Toronto would know everything I just told them, so there is no reason for me to tell them. That's what as you know exposition is. It's stupid, illogical, and unnatural. You don't explain to another person something they already know, and if you do, you're probably mansplaining and you should stop. In fact, that's the perfect way to sum up as you know exposition. It's mansplaining. It's annoying, it's dumb, it's unnecessary. It makes me think that you think I'm not smart enough to understand what's going on or what you're doing, and it makes people not like you, so kindly stop. And the worst part is that if Shyamalan really didn't want to go to the lengths of trying to weave Zuko's backstory into the main story in a way that was tasteful and made sense, if he wanted to just info dump it all here and now, he technically still could have, just by removing the line, as you know. If that line wasn't there, then this scene would have still been terrible, but at least the crew could have had the plausible deniability of not knowing this information already. I mean, it's far-fetched, seeing as they're all Fire Nation soldiers and should know this information, but hey, I can suspend my disbelief. But the phrase as you know is used, so I hate this movie. In conclusion, exposition bad. It's info-dumpy, overzealous, illogical, and very telly. It's boring at best and insultingly stupid and angering at worst. Honestly, you'd think Shyamalan had never heard of the concept of show, don't tell.
Secret tunnel. Secret tunnel.
The world building in this movie is barely there. Yes, we see that there are 4 nations, each with their own unique style of bending, but that is the very bare minimum. Apart from the different bending styles, we learn virtually nothing about these 4 nations and the overall world they exist in. If you've got 4 different nations, there's bound to be wildly different cultures and histories within each one. What's the music like? What are traditional instruments? When is music played? Are there traditional dances? When are they performed? How do they differ from modern dances? What is valued within each nation, and why is that valued? What are the governments like? How are they chosen? How's the economy? Do nations trade with one another? Does the Fire Nation as the wager of this war partake in trade too? What are non-bending non-bending fighting styles from each nation? Who's allowed to practice them? Are some people not allowed to bend? If so, why? What religions exist, if any? Are spirits the only deity-like figures, or are there others? Does everybody love the Avatar? Are they seen as a sort of god? Okay, these are questions that I spat out in the span of maybe 5 minutes. There is so much to be explored when it comes to world building. This movie really only made an effort with the costumes, I guess. You can see 4 distinct types of clothing throughout it, but even then, it's not enough. Enter show reference number 2. Almost every single question I spat out earlier was answered to some extent in the show. Music absolutely differs from nation to nation. For example, the music we hear Iroh and the men on Zuko's ship playing is different to the music that is played during the feast at the Northern Water Tribe, which is different to the music in the Fire Nation band practice, which is different to the music of the Sun Warriors. One traditional instrument we know of is the sungi horn, and music is played for many different reasons, most commonly for celebrations or rituals. Aang shows Fire Nation kids a traditional Fire Nation dance, which was clearly performed at gatherings 100 years ago. We can see that they definitely differ from modern dancing when Aang and Katara do their number, which looks like it's based on waterbending forms. Honor and reputation is valued in the Fire Nation because they are a very proud people. Tranquility and life is important among the air nomads because they believe all life is sacred. Perseverance and cooperation makes up the Earth Kingdom because they believe in coexistence with the other nations, and peace and family is significant in the Water Tribes because of their connection to nature, each other, and the rest of the world. The Fire Nation's government is an autocratic, absolute hereditary monarchy that uses primogeniture succession, which is a really fancy way of saying that the oldest child will become the next monarch. The Earth Kingdom is a confederate constitutional monarchy, which has multiple states joined together that are ruled by a single overlord monarch, but that all recognize different monarchs within their states. E.g., Kwe is the ruler of Ba Sing Se, the capital of the Earth Kingdom, which makes him the Earth King, ruler of the entire Earth Kingdom. However, Bumi is the king specific to the city of Omashu. The Northern Water Tribe is a unitary hereditary monarchic chiefdom, in which there is one all-supreme ruler. However, they have a small council that advises them. The Southern Water Tribe is a federal parliamentary elected chiefdom, in which one person has all the power and everyone else is loyal to them. This may sound like the Fire Nation's government, but cannot be further from it. Unlike the Fire Nation's autocratic absolute hereditary monarchy, the children of the chief, aka Katara and Sokka, are not considered royalty and are not guaranteed to be chief after Hakoda. The Southern Water Tribe's government is not hereditary. It does not use primogeniture succession. Instead, chiefs are elected. Finally, the air nomads were a unitary directorial ecclesiocracy. They had no definitive government which made unified decisions, but rather elders that presided over each of the 4 temples. And to be completely clear, these words and all of this technical terminology for each form of government are never mentioned in the show. I pulled them off of Avatar Wiki, but they didn't need to be specifically mentioned because I can still recognize the different traits of each government and understand how they work when watching the show. The economy is clearly thriving in the Fire Nation, and could be better in others. Ba Sing Se seems to be doing fine, while other cities and villages in the Earth Kingdom are suffering. The Southern Water Tribe specifically is nowhere near its former glory, probably because waterbenders were huge contributors to the economy, so no waterbenders, no economy. Though we don't really see trade, we know it exists. In Book 2, Chapter 13, titled Journey to Ba Sing Se, Part 2, The Drill, Long Feng tells the king the drill has a Fire Nation insignia on it because it was imported. Even though this is a lie, it's plausible to the king, which shows trade is not unheard of. It exists within this world. Non-bending fighting styles are very prevalent. The Earth Kingdom has the Kyoshi Warriors, named after Avatar Kyoshi. The group consists of women and Sokka at one point, because Suki made him drink Respect Women juice and now he chugs it every day. The Water Tribes have their versions of warriors, which, incidentally, Sokka is also a part of. It's usually young men who become warriors. Sword fighting is prevalent in the Fire Nation. When Zuko isn't firebending, he's wielding double broadswords and looking damn good while doing it. Also, you guessed it, Sokka mastered sword fighting. I'm pretty sure anyone can practice sword fighting, although Master Piandao specifically is very picky with who he teaches and will only take those he believes are worthy. The only nation that doesn't seem to have a non-bending fighting style is the air nomads, which makes sense seeing as they value peace and life, and never really saw their airbending as a fighting form. In most of the world, if you're a bender, you're allowed to practice and become better. This is only limited because of the war, when the Fire Nation goes around imprisoning earth and waterbenders, and also wipes out the entirety of the air nomads except for this guy. However, the Northern Water Tribe restricts women benders to only learning how to heal instead of learning how to fight, cause yay, patriarchy. Katara was badass enough to challenge this, although the show didn't make it clear if the rule changed for everyone or just for her. I could probably find that information on some wiki somewhere, but I don't really want to look for it because I've been scripting this video for days and I'm tired. Man, I hate this movie. Okay, let's keep going. Religions don't really seem to exist within this world. It's really only the spirits that are looked up to as these larger-than-life deity figures and that have the power to help or harm humans. See Painted Lady, Heibai, the ocean and moon spirits, etc., etc. The Avatar is kind of seen as a godlike figure, but not everybody loves them. Obviously, the the Fire Nation wants to capture Aang so he can't fight them, but in Book 2, Chapter 5, titled Avatar Day, Team Avatar stumbles onto this town that hates the Avatar because Kyoshi killed their Emperor Qin the Great. Granted, Aang saves their village from the Fire Nation and changes their minds, but they still held resentment towards the Avatar for like 3 generations. That was a lot. Clearly, there is so much more to this world than just water, earth, fire, and air. On top of the in-world lore, there's lots of real-life lore that went into building it. Each nation is based on one or more real cultures. The Water Tribes, specifically the southern one, is based on the Inuit. The Earth Kingdom is based on medieval China, the Fire Nation is based on Imperial Japan, and the Air Nomads are based on the Tibetan monks. And you can see that, especially in the architecture, hair, and clothing. You can feel how all of these real-world influences combine together to make one fresh, layered, rich universe. The world in the show feels real. It feels lived in, like it's hundreds of thousands of years old, like it's a living, breathing entity. The world in the movie feels like it's just water, earth, fire, and air, which by itself is not groundbreaking. Elemental magic isn't exactly new and exciting. It's the worlds that elemental magic is put in that are. The Last Airbender's world building is bland. It's surface level. The world in the movie doesn't feel three-dimensional, like it's existed for thousands of years before the story takes place and will exist for thousands of years afterwards. It feels like this world was born when I pressed play on this movie and will cease to exist as soon as the end credits roll, which is really sad, because this world is so cool. Many people clearly put so much time, energy, and care into crafting it, into making it more than just water, earth, fire, and air, and yet that was the only thing the movie decided to use.
Secret tunnel! Secret tunnel!
This movie's structure is bizarre. It technically follows a 3-act structure, but the pacing absolutely messes it up. Watching this movie both feels like so much is happening and also nothing is happening. The first act is paced alright, I guess. We meet our nothingness in human forms the movie wants to pass off as characters. We enter this setting of the Southern Water Tribe, we have an inciting incident with Aang being discovered in the iceberg, and the fallout that comes from that, which is Zuko and his men arriving in the Water Tribe, realizing Aang is the Avatar, and Katara and Sokka going to help Aang escape from his ship. This is technically alright. It doesn't go too fast, and the only place where it really drags is that exposition scene we talked about before. From a structure and pacing standpoint, I can get behind it. But then everything falls apart. The second act of this movie is one of the messiest things I've ever witnessed. There are 3 major perspectives: Team Avatar, Zuko and Iroh, and Zhao and Ozai, and all of them are handled poorly. It's not impossible to juggle 3 perspectives across a single story. It's definitely been done before, but this movie has no balance, rhyme, or rhythm to it. It also doesn't help that everyone is in a new location for almost every scene. Team Avatar is traveling across the world, so every single time we see them, they're somewhere new, and we don't exactly know where. Yeah, there's a location stamp at the bottom of the screen, but we don't really have anything to attach it to. Like, we don't know what the southern section of the Earth Kingdom truly looks like, so it doesn't help to know that that's where we are. Zuko and Iroh are also in different locations from almost every scene since they're chasing the Avatar, which makes it even worse. Zhao and Ozai are a little bit better about this. When they're together, it's usually in the Fire Nation, but when Zhao is alone, who the hell knows where he is? All this moving around is very disorienting. There's a reason stories usually have a certain number of locations and set pieces, because of budgeting reasons, yeah, but also because it helps to limit your locations when you're trying to tell one cohesive story over a relatively short period of time. We as an audience have enough to try and remember in like an hour and a half, so it's not helpful to add all these locations on top of that, especially if we're only going to be there for one scene. So the constantly changing locations don't help with the pacing, because we're cycling through them lightning fast. In other news, the runtime between each set piece is so strange. Sometimes there's a lot of downtime between them, other times there's not so much, so during the times where we have set piece after set piece after set piece, it feels like we're gunning it, but then we have so much downtime and suddenly we're moving at 1 kilometer an hour. I'd say the midpoint of this story should have been the Blue Spirit sequence, since it was kind of a turning point. It was one of the most major obstacles Aang faced, but it was also the first time we saw Zuko and Aang working together. It gave us a different side of their dynamic and made us see Zuko in a different, better light. However, this isn't the midpoint no matter how much it feels like it should be. It comes maybe 40% of the way through the movie, and it feels off. I think this is the case because the movie spends the last bit of Act 2 and all of the third act in the Northern Water Tribe. On one hand, I appreciate the idea of spending more time in the Northern Water Tribe to make audiences build an attachment to it, so we care when the Fire Nation invades. On the other hand, it throws the structure of the movie way off. Really, we should have arrived at the Northern Water Tribe at the beginning of Act 3, because that would make sense for the narrative. The whole goal for Team Avatar has been to get to the Northern Water Tribe, so it makes sense from a storytelling perspective perspective that happens at the beginning of Act 3, and the rest of the act is spent trying to save it. Because the movie spends more time in the Northern Water Tribe, it makes the first half of the movie go super fast, and then slows down in Act 3, which is the opposite of what should be happening. Yeah, this movie's structure and pacing is a mess, so just add it to the list of other reasons this movie sucks.
Secret Tunnel! Secret Tunnel!
Commander Zhao is one of the primary antagonists in this movie, and yet I couldn't care less about him. Not only is he played by the least menacing actor, but his character itself is not good. His entire goal throughout the movie is to capture the Avatar before Zuko does, but in my opinion, his motivation for it isn't the strongest. Enter show reference number 3. In the show, Zhao wants to capture Aang before Zuko because he wants to claim that glory for himself. He thinks of Zuko as a silly child, incapable of succeeding in this endeavor. He also wants to go down in history as one of the most powerful admirals of the Fire Nation, and thinks it's his destiny to kill the ocean and moon spirits in order to end all waterbending. He's built to be a threatening antagonist, the main antagonist of Book 1, and it works. He's narcissistic, and because of this, he's evil. Everything he does is to service himself. It's because he wants to build up his own name and claim his own glory on his own terms. He doesn't consult with Ozai at all. He does everything he does by himself on his own accord, because that's the kind of person he is. In the movie, Zhao is directly working on Ozai's orders. He consults with Ozai at every turn, so every move he makes is because Ozai wants him to. He doesn't start hunting the Avatar because he wants that glory for himself. He does it because he tells Ozai that Zuko got close, and that if Zuko is allowed to capture the Avatar and return home, then Zuko will be Zhao's superior again, and that's bad, because Zhao pissed him off. Like, it's so unclear as to why Zhao and Ozai are plotting to find the Avatar before Zuko. It just doesn't make sense. So instead of Zhao being a menacing opponent who is hell-bent on stealing Zuko's glory for himself because he wants to make his own name more impressive, Zhao takes Ozai's orders to capture the Avatar for reasons. It's a lot less menacing when your primary antagonist doesn't have his own thoughts and motivations. The movie takes away his agency as a character and makes him feel like just Ozai's henchman. He doesn't feel like a villain in his own right. In the show, Ozai is Voldemort and Zhao is Bellatrix, both equally evil, both equally threatening in their own rights. But in the movie, Ozai is still Voldemort, and Zhao is Death Eater number 23. Which brings me to my next point. Though Zhao should be the primary antagonist, he doesn't feel like it because Ozai exists in this movie. Ozai is the Fire Lord. He's the big bad behind this entire war, which makes us naturally think that he's the biggest villain. Because of that, Zhao feels smaller and less threatening than he should, since we know he's the lesser of two evils. However, Ozai doesn't do anything in the movie to make him the big bad. He just stands around, or sits around, giving out orders. And it's the strangest thing, because logically, we know he's the big bad, but he doesn't feel like the big bad, and it's weird. It's like this strange villain mind-bending where we don't know who we should be more afraid of. The guy who only acts on another guy's orders, or the guy who sits around and gives orders and does nothing else. Neither of them feels deserving of all my terror. Which brings me to the next section.
Secret Tunnel! Secret Tunnel!
Ozai's presence in this movie is frustrating. One reason is because it makes the villain dynamic very strange, as I already covered, but don't worry, there are more reasons. Not only does Ozai's inclusion in this movie make for a less effective villain in Zhao, but it also downplays Ozai himself as a villain. Again, he's played by the least menacing actor, which already doesn't help things, but even if he was played by someone else, I still don't think this would work, and that's because Ozai has no business being in this movie in the first place. Enter show reference number 4. In the original show, Ozai wasn't physically present until Book 3. The most we ever see of him is in Zuko's flashbacks, and even then, we never truly see him. His face is never shown to us once. All we see of him is the back of his head, his mouth, or his silhouette, and this is so deliberate it hurts. By hiding Ozai's face until Zuko returns to the Fire Nation in Book 3, it not only gives us insight into how Zuko himself sees his father as something that he can't face, but it also shrouds Ozai in mystery. It makes him seem like this huge, larger-than-life figure, a mythical entity that no one truly knows anything about. And how are you supposed to fight a mythical entity that you don't know anything about? Well, that's the thing. You can't. It makes the stakes so much higher, because it seems impossible to fight him. And you might be thinking, well, if we never actually see the bad guy being bad, then how are we supposed to fear him? And in Ozai's case, we see the bad guy being bad through the entire Fire Nation army. We get a lot of the Fire Nation army being the worst people ever, and Ozai is behind all of that. Ozai is the symbol of all the fear and pain the Fire Nation armies spread. But then you might think, but Oishi, in the section about characters, you said the Fire Nation being evil is too large of an idea to wrap our heads around. If you're implying that Ozai being the enabler for all of that is enough to make him a menacing villain, isn't that hypocritical? Shouldn't Ozai's evil be personalized? And to you, I say, yeah, you're right. And they did, in fact, personalize Ozai being evil, through Zuko. No good person would attack and banish from their home a 13-year-old child, much less their own son. The fact that he did that without blinking solidifies how truly terrible of a person he is. So we don't need to see Ozai at all. We don't need to see Ozai doing evil things firsthand. We can understand he's a bad guy and fear him because of it through his past abusive tendencies. When Zuko does return home and sees his father for the first time in like 3 years, this is when we see Ozai for the first time as well. This face reveal is powerful, since it's something we've been waiting for all this time. And you might think that finally seeing him takes away the mystical, larger-than-life energy around him, but it absolutely doesn't, because this is how we're introduced to him.
You have redeemed yourself, my son. Welcome home.
This low-angle shot of him taking up the entire screen, surrounded by flames, walking through literal fire like it's nothing, it reinforces our idea that he's all-powerful. He's like a god. So after we finally get to see his face, we keep seeing it everywhere. For 40 episodes, almost 20 hours, we've seen virtually nothing of this man, and now suddenly we can't escape him. It really reinforces the power he holds, and also reminds us that Team Avatar is now an enemy territory, and yes, I am including Zuko in that. They are under Ozai's thumb now, and we can feel the danger of that. This is all amazing! Going from not seeing his face at all to make him seem larger than life, to only seeing his face to reinforce the threat of him is genius. It's a great way to build up a major villain. The movie decided, nah, we'll just show his face right from the beginning, which, alright, I mean, I guess that wouldn't be so terrible on its own. Many movies show the villain's face and they're still menacing villains, but everything else surrounding this is so dumb. First of all, you're showing his whole face, sure, whatever. You've made that decision and that's fine. So then why, like halfway through the film, are you framing Ozai like this? What is the point of this? Usually when you use a stylistic shot like this, it's for a reason, and the first reason that pops into my head is because you want to keep Ozai's identity a secret. So then, why did you already show his face throughout the whole movie? It doesn't make sense! And also, since you're showing Ozai's face, since you've decided he's going to be a part of this movie, he needs to be more active, and he's absolutely not. Again, I'm not afraid of someone who stands around and gives orders. He's not threatening in any way, even though we still get Zuko's backstory. This scene has no emotion at all. This is because, once again, we get this information through an info dump, so I'm bored, I don't care. In the show, this was a flashback as Iroh explained to the men on their ship why Zuko is the way he is. We actually get to see this terrible thing happen to him, which creates a stronger connection between us and the event. The movie is just Dev Patel talking to a random kid, and it's like, what? I don't care. When you're dealing with information as important as this, it is always more powerful to show instead of tell. So not only do I not fear Ozai at all, but he also doesn't seem all-powerful. We never see him bend, we never see him fight, we never even see him raise his voice. This movie has done nothing to make me think that defeating this guy is going to be incredibly difficult. I feel like someone could just walk into the throne room and shoot him and it'd be over. I have a migraine.
Secret tunnel, secret tunnel.
Zuko sucks. I feel like I've been saying that about every single thing about this movie, but am I wrong though? Zuko is the smallest villain throughout the movie. Like if the villains were placed in a hierarchy, Ozai would be the biggest bad, Zhao would come next, and then it would be Zuko. But in this movie, Zuko is nothing. As I mentioned before, he's way too dramatic, and like the other villains, he doesn't seem like a threat at all. We barely see him firebend, which, side note, which I'm gonna slip in here because I don't know where else to talk about it, but the bending in this movie is atrocious. I feel like I could do better effects in Photoshop, and I've never used Photoshop. And the Fire Nation needs a source to be able to bend, which is dumb, but okay. Anyway, back to Zuko. He doesn't feel like someone we should actually be worried about. He barely interacts with anyone from Team Avatar. I think the only times he did was at the beginning when Aang escapes from his ship, and then at the end at the Northern Water Tribe. He makes little to no impact on Team Avatar, so he makes little to no impact on us as the audience. Because they almost never interact, it doesn't seem like finding the Avatar is his #1 priority, and seeing as that's his primary character motivation, it makes him feel more useless. He doesn't seem like an actual threat. He seems more like a whiny, annoying, emo kid, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Enter show reference number 5. Zuko in Book 1 in the show is essentially a whiny, annoying emo kid. He's insanely entitled and rude, very hostile, ready to fight at a moment's notice, and obsessed with finding the Avatar. He's a real challenge for Team Avatar. Wherever they go, Zuko is close behind, going so far as to use Katara's mother's necklace as a bargaining tool, threatening people Team Avatar interacted with to tell him where they went, and using a shirshu, which is a trekking animal, to find them. Capturing Aang is always his priority, the only exceptions being choosing to save his crew from a storm over going after Appa, and choosing to find Iroh over following Team Avatar. And those are fantastic characterizing moments, but this video is already way too long, so we won't get into that. So yeah, he's not the greatest dude in Book 1, but it works, because we know exactly why he's like that. Everything he does is because he wants to gain approval from his father. He's not obsessed with regaining his honor, more so that he's obsessed with getting his father's validation. And this is very apparent during the Blue Spirit sequence. Man, there's so much wrong with this, I don't even know where to begin. Okay, well, the Blue Spirit sequence in the show is one of my favorites throughout the entire series, and this is actually one of my favorite episodes as a whole, because it gives us that much more depth into Zuko as a character and his dynamic with Aang. In the show, they're a team, right from when Zuko enters Aang's cell all the way until they make it past the gates. They are constantly fighting together, playing off each other's moves to further their journey to the gates. As viewers, we realize that they're really good together. They don't even need words to communicate. After Zhao says he needs the Avatar alive, they're allowed to leave because the Blue Spirit threatens to kill him. After they're outside the gates, Zhao gets one of the archers to take out the Blue Spirit, at which point Aang realizes it's Zuko. He's rightfully horrified and is about to leave, but sees a bunch of Fire Nation soldiers charging towards them, so he takes Zuko with him. They hide out in a forest until Zuko comes to, at which point Aang talks about his Fire Nation friend Kuzan, and asks Zuko if he thinks they could have been friends too. Zuko firebends at him, and Aang leaves him alone in the forest. That's fantastic. There are so many character moments. We see a different side of Zuko, a Zuko that works against the Fire Nation, aka his usual persona, as the Blue Spirit, and it's our first time seeing Aang and Zuko working together. It's lovely. It foreshadows their eventual partnership and sets up their future friendship. And also, we know why Zuko saves Aang from the Fire Nation, because if he didn't, then he would never be able to capture Aang himself, regaining his honor and getting his father's approval. That is so clear to us the moment that Blue Spirit mask comes off and we see Zuko underneath. In fact, I, like I'm sure many others did, guessed even before the mask came off that it would be Zuko underneath because it was the only logical explanation. That's what great writing does. It gives you all the information you need to be able to piece together the narrative yourself. This entire sequence services Zuko's character and his relationship with Aang. In the movie, it's nowhere near this complex. First of all, Aang and the Blue Spirit don't even fight together for much of the sequence. Instead, the Blue Spirit is over there fighting off a bunch of men, and Aang is in this wind thingy doing something dumb. We don't know what they're like together. We don't get to see if they fight together well, if they complement each other, if they seem to have this unspoken understanding of each other. Second, they try to use that decision point Aang comes to when he learns Zuko is the Blue Spirit, but they get it so wrong that the meaning behind the moment changes entirely. In the movie, Aang has gotten free from the Fire Nation army and is about to fly away when he looks back and sees the Blue Spirit still fighting. He hesitates for a moment, but goes back to help the Blue Spirit. This is so lackluster. In this scene, the Blue Spirit is still on his feet. He's still holding his own pretty well against numerous Fire Nation guards. He's doing fine. If Aang left now, he could believe the Blue Spirit would have been completely okay. After all, he made it into the stronghold all by himself already, and he's a competent fighter, so it's not a stretch to think that he could get out as well. Also, the Blue Spirit at this point is nobody. He's a guy in a mask with no connection to Aang. So Aang going back to help the Blue Spirit here is not a huge characterizing decision. Yeah, it still shows he's a good person, but we already know that. This moment in the show comes when Zuko is out. He's just been hit with an arrow. He is unconscious. There is no way for him to defend himself. On top of that, Aang discovers that the Blue Spirit is the guy who's been chasing him across the world, trying to capture him for the very reason Zhao did. He is 100% right to be angry and terrified, and if he'd left like he was initially planning to do, no one would have blamed him. And yet, he knows that to leave now means Zuko will die. So even though he has no good reason, he chooses to save Zuko. Can you see the difference between these two scenes? The forest scene is not even a scene. Aang just leaves Zuko in the forest and then skedaddles. There's no insightful conversation, there's no question of whether or not he and Zuko could have been friends. Instead, this throwaway line,
"We could be friends, you know,"
is shoehorned into their battle at the Northern Water Tribe, and it's like, what? Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing sparked that line. It's random and forced, and I hate it. Also, when Aang removes the Blue Spirit mask and sees Zuko underneath, I'm willing to bet the first reaction of anybody who hasn't seen the show would be, huh? Because unlike Unlike in the show, Zuko's need to regain his honor does not seem very present. I'm pretty sure he only mentions his honor like once or twice. It's not on anybody's mind by the time the blue spirit sequence rolls around, so you can't guess that Zuko is the blue spirit before the mask is removed. You barely know why he's the blue spirit when it is removed. So yeah, Zuko is nothing. And it hurts to see one of the most well-written characters I've ever encountered to be relegated to this. He's not annoying, whiny, and entitled because he was raised to be that way by a father who doesn't love him, but from whom he still constantly seeks validation. He's annoying, whiny, and entitled because, I don't know, the script told him to be so.
Secret tunnel, secret tunnel.
I don't even know how to end this. To be honest, my brain is so fried at this point that I can't say anything insightful and have it be coherent. So, this is the worst movie ever made, and I'm going to go back to pretending it doesn't exist. In conclusion, movie bad, I have a migraine, thanks for sitting through this, go watch the original show.
Like, Aang's name is like, and then it's like, why did you do that? It's like, it's more, he said it's more correct. It's more correct to name him Ong. I go, then why is he white?